When life throws you a curveball, how are you going to handle adversity? Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast, where you're about to go on a journey as I interview security, business, and entertainment leaders on what it takes to stay fearless. I'm your host, Mark Ledlow, and enjoy today's episode. Well, folks, if you're just joining us, this is Dr. Rob McKenna. Is that correct, Rob?
That is correct.
Okay, just making sure I didn't jump your last name. Dr. Rob McKenna, he is a subject matter expert in psychology and got a doctorate in psychology. And he's up in Seattle area, and he runs and leads the Wild Leaders. And he coaches with corporate clients to different organizations throughout the country. He's got a team of folks that work with him. And shout out to Ron Warman, who gave us the introduction a while back. And I know a lot of people that work in Rob's circle, and we've been talking about having him come on the show. And here we are having a discussion on leadership and trust, and trying to give the younger generation and the older generation a bridge to figure out how they can work together. And we're we're creating a theory lab on how we can help each other out so we can be all productive in our life and just not beat up the younger generation because we all think they live in basements with their mom and dad, which is totally untrue.
Yeah.
And we got to give them a break because, they're brilliant. They're wise men and women, they grew up on social media and different things. Like I didn't grow up on social media. So I think the older generation gives them a bad rap, and I think they're very capable and they're the future of our country.
Yeah.
And we got to take care of the future of our country. We got to give them grace. And Rob, you're explaining, everybody goes through seasons of life. And, we all went through seasons of life. I know guys, hearing stories of guys drinking beer out of cowboy boots at a bar, doing fake pot. And, we all do our stuff, crazy stuff when we're kids. And we all grow out of that. And I think we got to show, like you said, show them grace and then give them the structure where they can be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, and Mark, I'm going to out part of myself too, that most people know about me is a lot of my inspiration for the systems, the leadership development systems that I built. And it's what's called the WILD toolkit. So it's this whole and intentional leader development toolkit. It's 10 different developmental assessments. But one of my original inspirations is that I'm still a gamer. So I'm, mid 50s. And one of my bragging points is that I can still beat up on most 12-year-olds at Call of Duty. And I say that because I learned a lot from what gaming platforms did in terms of motivating change. And one thing that gaming platforms are really good at is metrics.
Oh, never knew that.
So if you get into the gaming world, it's all metric driven. And so this generation of gamers, and by the way, you don't have to be a Call of Duty player to get this. Like, my wife plays the Nerds card game on her phone. So that's metrics driven also, because you're trying to achieve certain kinds of scores.
Right.
And so it's kind of funny because this generation, this gaming generation, and there are a lot of them entering the workforce or who already are there, they understand metrics.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? And when you start to measure the right things, it motivates. And so it's like to not be afraid to call people accountable for certain metrics. Now, not to make it robotic. Because we are dealing, like I said, with flesh and blood. These are humans, right?
Yeah.
But they're used to that. And so I learned a lot about what it would mean to inspire change and development through my experience of gaming. Like, quite honestly, I have old stories that I tell from the stage about that, funny things that I out myself about. So I think that's kind of inspirational too.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a flashback of going to my sister's house, Hope's house here in Southern Oregon, and all my nieces and nephews, they're all gamers. And, hey, Mark, you want to go play a game? You want to do gaming with us? I'm like, no, I'd get destroyed. My 5-year-old nephew, Brody, he has the most kills of all his teenage brothers and sisters, or they're in their 18 plus or adults. He has more kills than kid is a genius. He gets there and he has more confirmed kills. My sister goes, you don't believe this. This kid, he's 5 years old and he can outplay most of those guys on the console that he plays against. I'm like, what the heck? Hey, Mark, do you want to play with us? I'm like, No, 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 no. I gave up
Yeah.
I gave up Atari a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's just weird how, like you said, once they hit a matrix and they get challenged psychologically, and that I guess dopamine hits them, and they want to pursue and pursue.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the inspirations was you remember the game Halo?
Yeah,
A lot of people played it. I played it.
yeah.
And as soon as that game went online, so originally we did LAN parties, local area network parties, where people would show up. All these, middle-aged men would show up with their Xboxes and wire them together through a router, and
Yeah.
but as soon as it went online, it was interesting because my nephew gave me a call and he said, "Hey, did you know that you can go on to the Bungie website that owned Halo and you can see all kinds of data about your play?" And Mark, there was one particular map. So if you're in first person shooter games, there's like they're
Uh-huh.
maps, right? So there's these virtual little contained worlds. And on this one map, it was a 7-story building, and all the players would start at the top of the building,
Mhm.
and it had a hole through the top that went from the 7th floor all the way to the basement. So can you
Mhm.
picture it? So you start the game, and there's this giant hole that went to the very bottom of the building. And I was getting beat up by all these kids, when I was playing, and I was like, I got to figure this map out. So I went onto the website, and I see that it showed me the metrics on which space age weapon was being used against me most often. And it was this rocket launcher. So it was this space-like rocket launcher. And so on the map, I could see where that rocket launcher, they call it, spawned in the game. And it always spawned in the same spot. It always showed up. And what I found out was that rocket launcher I was getting beat up so bad by this thing, but you didn't start with it. You had to go find it. And so the reality was, when I looked at this map on their website, and this is way back in the day, I realized that rocket launcher, because all the players, when the game would begin, they would go to that hole on the top of the building, and then they would fall to the bottom. And so what I realized, of course, is, where's the rocket launcher? It's at the bottom of the hole. So the next time I played, I ran to the hole. I beat all those 12-year-olds to the hole. I dropped to the bottom. I pick up the rocket launcher, and I kid you not, I watched my scores go up by 25%.
Wow.
And so that inspiration in me was like, oh my gosh, if I could help people identify the rocket launchers in their careers and their development using those kind of metrics,
yeah, that's powerful.
imagine what would change. And so it was cool when I say like these young people are living in a world where they're used to metrics. They're used to learning about those kinds of things based on changes in what in the gaming world they're called like the universe, which is basically the fundamental realities of a game. And so I think that's kind of inspirational, because we can put some clarity around what's going on and actually help them developmentally, help them do their jobs better, help them perform better, using some of the things that they're already used to.
So that's part of what's lacking in the workforce is, like you said, employers are not giving these men and women the matrix they're used to seeing when they play video games for entertainment. They're not getting that stimulus.
Maybe not. And maybe they have the capacity to provide it. Just some clarity around measurement. What is my job? It's amazing how many people in very significant revenue generating organizations do not have job clarity.
Wow.
And how do you, like in a military context, can you imagine not having job clarity?
Yeah.
And it happens, right? But
wow. To break down a mission and execution.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Organizational psychology is what they called it in college.
That's what I am.
I'm having flashbacks of studying psychology 300, 400 level courses and taking my test.
Right. Yeah.
So you have a doctorate in psychology. That is, so you have your bachelor's degree, and then you need 4 more years on top of your bachelor's degree, your doctorate. Is that adequate? Is that correct?
Yeah, I did 4 years, and then I did an MBA in the middle. So I spent about a year and a half doing that. So I wanted that business exposure. And then my PhD took about 5 years, and I studied what's called industrial organizational psychology. So it's I describe our field as the most powerful guild in corporate America that you've never heard of.
Wow.
Because people in, my colleagues in our across the country and the world, the bread and butter of our field is selection and performance management. So they're the people who are responsible for the systems that decide who gets in the door and what gets rewarded once they're in the door. So
Okay.
if you can imagine two more powerful systems, it's hard to imagine. Those are the things that are so critical, is like our hiring processes and our selection processes, and then our development processes and our
Mm-hmm.
performance management system. So that's kind of the bread and butter of the work that I do. And of course, my focus is on leadership development and trust. So as a piece of that puzzle.
You are going to be very busy, my friend, the next 4 years. Keeping everybody in check and mediation and everything that's going on. Holy crap. It's going to be busy 4 years.
Oh, Mark. Well, hopefully it'll be manageable with friends like you. So we'll figure it out together.
Wow. Yeah, it's going to be, I just
Yeah,
like, this is going to be a fun, we're living in a modern day movie.
we really are. We really are. Yeah.
What are your clients asking you to do for them? What are their pain buttons, and what is your solution? What are you hearing for the pain points for most of your clients?
Yeah, it's so some of the pain points. So what we have organizations identify before we ever in our discovery process
Mm-hmm.
is one of the first most important factors is identifying what we describe as their strategic moment. So
Mm-hmm.
what is it that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah,
Because any effort to build trust or to develop leader capacity requires us to understand the strategic moment that an organization is facing. Does that make sense? Like it's like
totally.
we start there. It has to be, development has to be directly applied to the job.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's why a lot of training programs have faltered, is because they start with sort of a one-off on personality or on, it's like the development is too far separated from the actual missional work. And so
Mm.
we start there. And I would say some of the strategic priorities that these organizations are facing, or pain points as you describe it. Succession planning comes up a lot.
Oh yeah, yeah,
So they're
yeah.
trying to figure out, how do I prepare my bench? And I always tell, CEOs, succession planning is leadership development after you've become desperate.
Whoa, that is
So
good.
if an organization were making an intentional investment in developing leaders early on, they wouldn't be desperate for that
Mm-hmm.
bench of successors. They would have been developing them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Succession planning, of course, growth is a huge issue, trying to understand how to grow well. And also, of course, organizations that are in a phase of decline, that's another hurting point.
Mm-hmm.
We work with a lot of, it's funny, I've done a ton of corporate work over the years. In the last few years, one of the industries that has grown for us is small to mid-cap companies.
Oh, interesting.
Um,
Okay.
and I mean, it's a massive, massive need across the country. When we talk about business, we so often talk about the Googles and the Microsofts of the world. But the reality is that there's a massive population of small to mid-cap businesses
Mm-hmm.
that make this country spin.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
we started working with a lot of farming equipment companies, with
Hmm.
you name it. Plumbing companies were growing like crazy during the pandemic, right?
Oh yeah, I can
We
imagine.
worked with small to mid-cap tech firms. I mean, all across the board. I would say that the number one thing, though, to your pain point question, Mark, is that once we've identified that strategic moment, this sounds so like cliche given all that I've said, but trust. They all know there's not one CEO that I can't have this conversation. If I ask them, what does trust have to do with the performance and well-being of the people in your organization right now?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody can have that conversation. So they're really trying to understand, how do I create an operational environment, the conditions where people can thrive, but also I care deeply about my people and where they're going and why. So how do I make that investment? And trust is at the center of that wheel.
Of
And
course.
they know, like you've said already, when trust is missing, it's like introducing a small amount of rust into a system. It just
Yeah,
it just
sure.
slows down the motor. And
Absolutely.
when trust is present, it's like a natural lubricant, but it takes maintenance. It's like trust isn't that on off switch. It takes maintenance, like everything else in our world. We have to take our cars in to make sure they have oil. And trust is something we have to continue to work at day after day after day.
You gotta
So
continue to
it is a
massage
pain
that
point.
relationship. You gotta keep massaging it, and keep having those touches. I think I heard A-Rod, Alex Rodriguez, the baseball player, say,
Yeah.
I thought I heard him say either 7 to 9 touches before a deal's done with a human being, a major deal. But
Yeah.
I may be off on the number. I remember hearing him say something on,
Yeah.
creating that trust with the human being.
Yeah.
They close the business still. Maybe
Yeah.
7 to 9
Yeah.
touches or something like that. But
Yep.
now, I see and hear a lot of optimism now for business. Are you hearing the same thing with the business climate?
That's a really good question. Do I hear optimism with the business climate? Yes. But with some obvious pain points. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Sure.
when you work in the small to mid cap markets, when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about businesses in the 5 to 500 million in revenue. And I'll tell you as examples, like, interest rates have had a tremendous impact on businesses right now. The
Oh,
businesses
sure.
we work with, especially if they carry a heavy inventory.
Ah, yeah, yeah.
So
Okay.
their carrying costs, because interest rates are higher, people aren't buying as much new equipment. And so you end up having these longer term carrying costs that cost these organizations millions of dollars.
Mm,
And I think that's kind of an invisible problem that people don't hear about all the time, that are challenging. Certainly it'd be, remiss not to mention that the cultural division in our country has caused tremendous anxiety and pressure on small to mid cap business owners, because they've got, a lot of the times they have half their workforce that is landing on one side politically and half their
sure.
workforce is landing somewhere else. And
Okay.
so the hidden story that no one talks about is that for any business leader that really does care,
Sure.
it's a difficult thing to navigate, to
Oh, yeah.
manage that tension between those existing polarities in culture. I hear about it often with dear friends who are clients of ours and beyond. So,
What's the best way to again navigate to get everybody get along? To stay apolitical in the workplace, or what's the advice on that point?
well, one of the things is, and then you're hearing about this in other places, but it's part of the reason why, like, leadership development can play a role in this,
Sure.
because the power of leadership development is there's certain things that we all have to be working on.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, for one example, is a necessity for each of us to understand our own competence and our skills, like what it is that we're really good at and
Mm-hmm.
what it is we need to develop. The reason why I say that related to this whole question of polarization in culture is that as soon as people start talking about things like that we all know are important, and they start to get to know each other better,
Hmm.
some of those differences become much easier to navigate.
Okay.
And one of the things, what's fascinating too, Mark, is that I would say one of the most, if we studied the drivers of trust, but we also looked at what are some of the things that are holding it back.
Mm,
And this won't surprise anybody, but one of the biggest issues is our capacity to handle conflict.
okay. Sure.
So we're just, as a culture, I think as human beings, many of us are conflict avoidant. Like, we just, you know what I mean? And so the reality is to innovate and to grow a business, you
Mm-hmm.
have to be able to fight well. Like,
Wow.
it's a missional imperative. It's a part of our Wild Leaders charter. Everybody that is hired at Wild Leaders has to read and understand this charter. And one of the value statements, Mark, is that we fight well.
Fight
And
well.
do you know why that's in there? It's in there because I don't. I don't love conflict. Do
Yeah,
you know what I
nobody
mean? I
does.
wouldn't say that I'm particularly, like, I don't want to do that every day. Some people are fine with it. I'm like, no, I think most people would say, like, but we have to be able to face conflict well if we're going to actually make any progress whatsoever.
Right. Right.
So I think investing in people and their capacity and understanding how they might edit, it could actually be a really helpful way
Mm-hmm.
to decrease some of the polarization we see, so that people understand each other a little bit better.
Yeah, I had a vision of a movie or something with two litigators going at it in a courtroom. They love to argue.
Right. Right.
They're
Right.
just wired that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
But you have to get conflict resolution to get results. And
Yeah.
sometimes, I listen to Barbara Cochran on. She comes on my Instagram feed once in a while, and she has some gold nuggets once in a while that just pops up. Like, she says on Instagram, I think it was that She loved Friday. Why did she like
Mm.
Friday? Because she'd have conversations with people that were toxic in her organization,
Mm-hmm.
complainers. And Fridays, she'd say, "Come by the office. Let's grab lunch and have a coffee."
Yeah.
Well, her Fridays were have sit down and all that. Let's chat. How things going? And her mind, she knew she would be telling, "Hey, the company's got to move on." But she Fridays were her day to get rid of the toxic people in her organization.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of organizations just put up with toxic people.
Yeah.
And I think toxic people are the cancers of organizations from being really productive.
Yeah.
What is your advice on toxicity mentality in the workplace?
Yeah. Well, gosh, you light up my brain with these questions. So one of the things is this is one of the most powerful drivers. I keep mentioning these drivers from our research, but one of them is the emotional maturity of the leaders.
Whoa.
So, and what I mean by that is leaders who are both clear,
Hmm.
they're clear and direct, but also caring and caring.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And that is a fundamental paradox.
Yeah.
It's like, because we're asking people to be direct and truthful with one another, but also to express compassion and care.
Hmm.
And when it comes to toxicity, that fundamental capacity to increase in emotional maturity is so critical,
Mm.
so critical. And to your point, oftentimes if an organization has a lot of toxic kinds of issues,
Hmm.
let's say they have people who are those toxic kind of contributors where they're backbiting, they're talking behind people's backs. That's one of the most playground behaviors, the most obvious form of toxicity. You show me an organization that's toxic, and I'll show you an organization full of people who are triangulating every day. They're
Mm.
not speaking one-on-one. And so to the extent that you can increase the capacity of every person to be both direct and truthful and to express care and empathy and compassion, you start to reduce that toxicity pretty fast. But back to my point was, in an organization that has those toxic people, it's a leadership problem.
Everything rises and falls on leadership. John Maxwell.
Well, it means that you probably have people
Hmm.
who are putting up with it.
Ah, okay.
So there's a lack of courage and conviction that's allowing people to do those kinds of backbiting behaviors. And I'm not saying the leadership gets rid of those people either. I'm saying we
Right.
haven't set standards for ourselves, because a lot of time that behavior is being modeled all the way to the top.
Wow. Great point.
And it's one of the reasons that when we work with organizations, we will hardly work with an organization unless the most senior leader who's engaging with us is going to be engaged in the process.
That's pretty powerful.
Because I got tired, Mark, of working with organizations where leaders were like, I want to develop my people, but I'm not going to participate.
I don't want to develop. I don't need it.
And it's not just modeling. It's because most of the time they're going to be the major developmental challenge.
Interesting. The leader himself.
The leader themselves. Yeah. And so it's like, if they're not willing to edit, why would they expect anyone else to?
Well, here's a question. I'm going to go Joe Rogan on you.
Yeah.
Isn't that a sign of narcissism?
Possibly.
Okay. I just threw it out there.
Well, and here's why I say that is because narcissism is we talk about that as a personality trait so often.
Yeah.
Like something that's and so I think there is that, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, personality is only predictive of about 50% of the time. So it matters. But I would also say there's a possibility that that even at the most senior leader levels,
Mm-hmm.
it may be a sign of narcissism, which that we could talk all day long about that. There's a whole lot of research around that. But it also may be a sign that senior leader has actually never themselves been invited to develop and begin to edit.
So they're hiding behind a shill or a face mask. They're hiding behind.
They didn't even know it was possible.
Wow.
It's amazing how, I have a senior leader. This guy is in his 80s now. Mm-hmm. And he was the chairman of a global nonprofit that has tremendous impact around the world.
Yeah.
And he's in his 80s, and he sent me an email back in the fall. And it was so humbling because to have someone like this with an incredible resume. Mm-hmm. And he said, Rob, I had never been invited to develop myself this way when I was a young man.
Whoa.
And he was like, where was this when I was younger? An intentional developmental process that would have increased my leadership capacity and my capacity to just be a great contributing member of any team. And it's tragic. It's a generation that never had it modeled, and so sometimes struggles. So yeah, it could be a little bit of narcissism sometimes, and sometimes I think it's developmentally they just never got the invitation.
Wow.
I don't know.
That just tells me how much psychology and the studies of organizations, which is, what psychology does and psychology of organizations, how much more we have to learn.
Yeah.
How much more there's stuff that we don't know out there, because human beings are very complex.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Because everybody has a story. Everybody's got a closet. Everybody's got something in that closet that they, like Tim Wenzel, the Insecurities in Security.
Right.
And the security industry has the most alpha personality traits of any industry.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's a plague or if the virus came back in the security industry, but it's pretty prevalent with the alpha personalities. Everybody's just like, everybody wants to get the knuckles up, and they want to pounce on each other. Do you see what you see in security in other industries as well? The alpha personalities across all industries are kind of all the same because you're dealing with human complexities.
Yeah, I think so. What I do see some commonalities, but there's certainly in security folks, because of people being drawn to those kinds of roles. I think you see the necessity for some of that.
Okay.
What I do see is even in security is this would surprise people. You see those alpha personalities, but you also see people who are also peacemongers. There is that as well, where across every industry you would assume that everybody's just really tough, and it's the reality is that across every leadership population that we've worked with or studied, there's that nuanced story where some of them are really, really directive and really, really clear and really, really speak the truth. And then there's in that same industry, there's people who over pivot to trying to make everyone else happy. And so, and I always tell people, like, you can't make everybody happy without lying to somebody in a leadership role. You can't do it.
That's so true.
But also on the other side of that, if you're just being direct all the time and you don't hear people, you're missing half the data that's going to be important for making any major decision. And so, figuring that, but here's the way for your listeners, Mark, the way to think about this, and because it can sound really messy to think about when you just mentioned the complexity of people, and leaders, is that what's cool is that when it comes to developing people capacity, and this is where psychology gives us a lot to work with, there are certain common factors. And so the way I think about it is, when you go to the gym, there are certain muscle groups that every person has to work, right? We all have, unless you're missing a limb, which is completely possible for some people, right? But we all work the front of our arms and the back of our arms. We all work our shoulders and our back. We work our, we work our chest, muscles that are here. And we know what happens if you work one muscle too much. Like if all I did was bench press all day, my shoulders would turn in and that'd be weird. So to create balance, it's like, but we all know when we go to the gym, there are certain machines that are set up to work those common muscle groups. Right. To your point though, when we go to the gym, this is why we get a trainer. Every one of us knows that we have different work to do. You know what I mean? Like a buddy of mine was like, he would describe himself as having twig legs. And he's like, well, I got to work those legs, because they're just. And so I think the comforting part of that is we have common factors. Competence is an example of one of those factors. We all have to figure out our competence, but the way that plays out looks different for you than me.
Right. True.
And if we start to see that, the power of that is we can put systems in place that are those common machines in the gym. And then from there, deal with the complexity of the differences between what muscle groups people need to work, psychologically speaking, from a developmental standpoint. So
everybody listening to this show needs to hit the gym and work on their different complexities.
That's right.
Work that muscle out to be better, become a better human being.
That's what I spent my time building. I spent a lifetime building that gymnasium for leader development. That's what I did. So
holy cow.
Yeah.
Dang, we covered a lot in the last 1 hour. That was a lot of content, but that was great content. Um, Great information.
Yeah.
As we wrap up the show, Rob, what is your, advice going into the next year? New Year's resolution, everybody's got one. What are you seeing in the business world that people need help with? And yeah, just some parting words.
Yeah, one thing is certainly reach out to us if they have any questions about any of this. Contact at wildleaders.org is the way to get there. Wildleaders.org is our website. If they have any interest in trust or if we can't help you, we'll find somebody who can. And I think one of the things I hope this is encouraging is let me speak specifically to trust. Is
Okay.
that it's something I think that people are feeling a lot of right now. They don't know who to trust. I know recently you had a conversation on AI, and even AI in the weeks that have passed in the last few weeks, we've
Oh
had
yeah.
people it's moving so quickly that people are saying, I don't know if I trust this, or I don't like it that when I see an AI generated, now people are starting to recognize it,
Mm-hmm.
and even that is another conversation. But that I would say one point of encouragement would be to think about getting intentional about both your operational systems and your people development systems. And I think whether it's a young person or a more seasoned person who's running a business, is intentionality is a powerful thing.
Mm-hmm.
Setting goals for measurable progress is a powerful thing,
Right.
and not in a robotic way that we lose track of our humanity, because that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
But to think about really moving toward the tension of developing your people and developing your systems.
Right.
And so I hope that's encouraging, because that if I can get clear about my operational systems and my people development efforts, that's when the magic starts to happen. And my team is doing a 2-day offsite Monday and Tuesday where we're going to talk about that very thing for our organization. This is the work we do, but we are a case in point because we're a business also. So I hope that intentionality is a powerful thing. And I hope people would feel encouraged to get intentional, set some missional goals, and then start to develop systems and people that surround that.
Yeah, I think as we go in the new year, everybody's getting together for the first of the year, trying to figure out what they're going to do business wise. Everybody's got, put together teams to go
Yeah.
sell stuff and bring business in. And this is the time of year we're in. And so I know definitely your product and service is going to be a huge help to help those organizations be more productive and
Yeah.
profitable and create those trust in those environments and those that workplace.
Yeah.
The great stuff there. And audience, if you're listening, you could feel free to reach out to Rob he has a LinkedIn page as well, and his website is on his LinkedIn. So feel free to go reach out directly on his LinkedIn. Do you have a website? Yeah, I think you have a website too.
Yeah. Wildleaders.org. Yep.
Easy enough.
Reach us there.
Okay. And then feel free to look us up on all the podcast platforms and give us a 5-star rating. That helps us with the algorithms. And subscribe to us on YouTube. Mark Bungalow, we just hit like 100,000 subscribers on that thing. That's pretty wild. And thanks for supporting the show, folks. Thanks for tuning in. And we will catch you on the next episode of the Fearless Mindset. See you soon.